Here we go as we load up for this Tuesday. Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi, 6 o'clock Eastern Time on Tuesday, February 13th, Mardi Gras. And tomorrow, Ash Wednesday, Valentine's Day, and beyond that, we got the President's Day weekend coming up, which for most folks it's a 3-day weekend, and next week is a school vacation week on top of that. So on and on and on it goes. We've got a lot of stuff going on in the atmosphere. We're going to be going into a pretty wild period. But before we get started, I just want to just mention, Tom Adams, I appreciate what you're saying with your posts, but I'm not. This isn't a climate channel. This is a weather channel. We forecast weather here. I can't forecast whether a low is going to intensify or not based on the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. Okay, so it's kind of misplaced to put it here. The things that are going on, but I'm not going to get into how many parts per million CO2 is out in the atmosphere. I'll leave that to Al Gore while he's sitting around in his mansion spewing gas and burning oil and whatever else he does. Okay, so end of rant. It was a small one, but we're going to go forward. We're going to have a pretty crazy couple of weeks. I don't know how this is going to wind up playing out, but at the very least, it's going to be interesting. And I've already seen a few of you, like Daniello, with the 10 inches in northeastern New Jersey. This is for this weekend. You know what? Let's not really get into that with respect to amounts, because we have to work out a lot of details between now and then. So let's go forward and take a look here. We'll start with the GFS tonight. Going to have the new model run. And first things first, of course, we've got this cold shot that's going out tonight, this high moving east of Cape Cod. And there's a bit of an inverted trough off the east coast here, running from off the Florida coast northeast off the Carolinas, and it's producing a little moisture, got a little bit of Gulf moisture. Otherwise, much of the nation really kind of quiet at the moment. We do have some snow coming in overnight into tomorrow into the Pacific Northwest. Now we see milder air moving into the east on a west-southwest flow. Some Gulf moisture that runs up into the middle Mississippi Valley tomorrow. That's going to push toward the east as we transition over into an even milder air mass. There's a warm front that's going to be pushing through. In the meantime, you've got this band of snow along the Canadian border, up in the northernmost Dakotas, back through Montana and the northern and central Rockies, with another weather system dropping in. In the east, it's a cold front that will move through Thursday night and Friday. So Thursday, I'm going to see 60s. It's going to be pretty warm. And as we go into Friday, we've got a cold front coming. So, I'm going to just run up the temperatures a little bit, because the first time we get 60-degree temperatures coinciding with maybe some sunshine on Thursday for at least part of the day, that doesn't happen too often. But the yellow being probably the northern edge, the GFS sort of could underplay this to some degree, but this is at 1 in the afternoon, so the highs will be higher than this. Let's say that where you see the yellow is probably actually going to be where you might find the northern extent of 60-degree readings. So there might be some little pockets of 60-degree readings in southern New England, but definitely 60s and even some 70s. Wouldn't be surprised across Virginia, North Carolina. This is a pretty warm surge, and you can see the volatility going forward, because we do have a lot of cold air in Canada along the Canadian border with temperatures near and below zero. Getting also to the time of year where you're going to get these tight temperature gradients, and that's going to create some gusty winds at times. So just be aware of that going forward. When you get these warm-ups, you start getting into late February and March. The sun is really going to work on the atmosphere. The southern part heats faster than the north, and you get you could have temperatures below zero up along the Canadian border or even into the northern plains and Great Lakes, and temperatures in the 70s down in the Gulf states or even the 80s. But anyway, be that as it may, the next shot of cold air pushes through with a cold front. And speaking of 80s, you can see 80s here at the end of the week creeping up in the southeast and along the Gulf states. So here's a perfect example of that. So you got 80s in Florida and along the Gulf Coast. You've got temperatures below zero in parts of northern Minnesota and North Dakota. This is for Friday afternoon. And then that colder air gradually takes over and pushes southward. We get it back here into the northeast for Saturday and into Sunday. And this is where the models are going with the possibilities for some snow. Started with the Canadian and European and the GFS last night, all roughly in the same ballpark. Then the GFS midday kind of went its own way and sort of squashed everything, but it came back a bit on the late afternoon run. But here's the play with regards to that. Now, here's that front, okay? It comes on through, stalls out across the southern states, and we mentioned yesterday that in this pattern with these fast, everything's moving so fast, cold air masses coming in and out very, very quickly. The only way it's going to snow is if you, at least in my neck of the woods, which is, say, from New Jersey to southern New England, maybe you want to stretch that out to northern Virginia, Maryland, eastern Pennsylvania, on up through New York City. So let's say Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, and so on, and Boston. The only way you're going to see any snow of consequence here is if you get these cold air masses to time out with any kind of wave development at the same time. And it seems like that's the case here. As the high moves out, you get a wave that comes up, and there's cold air that's going to try to wedge back in. You got a high sitting over Nova Scotia. The Canadian and GFS and European models are actually even colder than this. The GFS late this afternoon has got a much less suppressed look, so it's got some snow on the northern fringe and some rain in coastal New Jersey and Long Island. The Canadian and the European actually are pretty close. I'm going to bring that up, and you can see it here, how the Canadian handles it. It has more of this high wedged back, and that pinches in cold air. It redevelops a low off the Maryland coast, off the Delaware Peninsula, and then takes it east-northeast from there, and that keeps the coastal areas pretty much all snow with this. The European did the same thing. Now, we'll see in subsequent runs whether the GFS is right with the warmer look. It may not be, because the European and the Canadian actually have deeper surface lows here. It has much more of an upper air feature at play. And that's where the difference lies here, folks, because when we look at the upper air, my big argument yesterday when we were talking about this was the fact that you didn't have a real definable shortwave trough that was going to move through here. And now, lo and behold, when we look at the European for Sunday morning, you actually can see the shortwave trough. There's a definable kink here. See how the height lines kind of slope down right along the coast near New Jersey, then kind of turn northeastward from there. So there's a definable shortwave here that both the European and the Canadian model show. Actually, the Canadian actually has a bit more of a kink. The GFS this afternoon, earlier today, kind of lost it. You know, it's a little harder to find on the GFS. It's there, but the European Canadian seem to have a much more definable feature at play here. So I want to see a couple of more runs before I, really jump in with both feet into the deep end with regards to Saturday night and Sunday. And it's going to have to be perfect. That cold air has got to wedge in, and otherwise it is going to warm near the coast. The shot of cold air that's coming down is coming in fast and going out fast. So a lot of times the model likes to rush the cold air out too quickly. So if you can keep it more of a northeast wind, it may stay colder longer. Let's see what models do as we go forward. So let's go back now, and we'll go wide again, because then after this goes by, next week we're going to see another warm-up in the east. as that cold high moves out, and then another system. You can see this getting ready from Texas northeastward into New England. So there's rain and showers around on Tuesday. Got some snows in the dropping down and through the northern and central Rockies back into northern California. That by the way, translates into a low in Utah and a bit of a snaking, what looks like almost a 1,000-mile warm front. I don't know if this is realistic or not. There might be more of a low back through southwestern Missouri with this. You've got ice across the lower lakes. You've got snow across the middle and upper lakes and back through the northern plains. And then you run up a low to the northeast and get another one. So in this vision here, it could get very warm in the east for a couple of days, and then that goes out to the northeast, and you gradually start to get a blocking signature that begins to develop. You can see it here on the surface. There's a big high that's coming down in central Canada. You've got lows that are trying to come east, and they have a tough time holding together. Big high tends to dominate. This is on this late afternoon run that we're seeing here. This is actually the way the low is tracking. I wouldn't necessarily focus on the specifics here, but just the idea that it's tracking low almost straight east and taking it off the mid-Atlantic coast and this big high that's enveloped around it is telling you that we're going into that blocking signature. Models seem to be really keying on this today, and they did key on it overnight. So here's how the upper air works with all this. That was the last day I just had up on the screen, by the way. So we'll let the maps load here. This is going to be a fun couple of weeks because we're going to have all this volatility. We're going to squeeze maybe some snow in between here Saturday night and Sunday, maybe go up to 70, even up my way for the middle part of next week. Wouldn't be a surprise depending on clouds and rain. And then after that, we go into this almost mega blocking pattern that's showing up. Sorry, it's just taking a little while for all these maps to load. But here we are. This is going into day 5. So we're going into Sunday here on the GFS. So there's the trough that lifts out in the northeast. That trough goes negative there. So, you got to be a little careful here that you could wind up, that the European and the Canadian may have the better idea in terms of strength. Now, you start to get that vortex in eastern Canada sort of moves up into northern Labrador. The trough drops down in the west. You still have this big ridge in the Gulf of Alaska. We are at day 8 at this point. Big ridge off the southeast coast. When you want to talk about these teleconnections, okay, so you got a big ridge in the Gulf of Alaska that usually connects to a big ridge off the southeast coast. And you've got 3 strong upper highs here. You've got this upper high in the Gulf of Alaska. You've got this upper high off the Florida coast and in the Bahamas. And if you look up northeast of Greenland, there's another upper high between Iceland and Europe. And that's part of that block that's developing. So we're into day 9 and day 10. Now this is where you start to get things to change. Watch this storm near the Azores and then watch the block up at Greenland and what happens here. That storm near the Azores just continues to strengthen and really becomes a dominant feature and actually retrogrades back westward, which is something you see oftentimes when you get blocking signatures. Here's the upper high building across Greenland and into eastern Canada. The GFS has shown this for about 5 or 6 runs in a row, and when we go to the end of the period, here's the look. You've got storminess out in the Atlantic. There's a system southeast of Newfoundland that extends an arm back into New England, northern New England, and into southeastern Canada. You have a cutoff low off of the California coast. Now, you still have this upper high in the Gulf of Alaska, but I just want you to notice that the actual ridge that's pushing from that high, instead of pushing straight up into Alaska, is pushing now northeastward into the Pacific Northwest. That's something we're going to have to watch because that could have implications down the road in terms of this overall scheme of what we're seeing. Another important feature I want to point out, and I noticed a few forecasters mentioned this, and I went back and looked, and they're right, and I agree with them. This low that's sitting north of Hawaii is also very important. This is on the prior run where it shows a pretty wrapped up cutoff low. That is going to be a player in terms of, you know, energy that's going to try to come in. Is it going to undercut the ridge? Is it just going to be locked away up there? It also kind of forces, you see how this ridge sort of gets stretched out east-west rather than more north-south? So that's a bit of a change too. This could impact things all the way down the road in all sorts of ways that, you know, for some, and I think probably most of those ways are going to be unforeseen at this point. But you can see the blocking signature here where you've got these upper lows way south of where they have been. We've seen that dominant kind of upper low that's been sitting up in Canada. Let's call it the normal position of the polar vortex. But now that the vortex is split and weakened, you're getting displacement of cold air in a big way. And a few people that have been watching this, I've been reading some more about it, really pointing to the fact that this is a major event that has occurred in the upper atmosphere. So its implications on the downstream, on the lower atmosphere, still remain to be seen. So, you know, we could have some weird things happen, or stuff that at least we haven't seen in quite a while. I think it's going to be very, very interesting going forward with all of this. So at this point, let me jump to, oh no, let me leave this up. I'm sorry. All of this, by the way, is going to have implications on the weather across in Europe, which we'll take a look at. And I'm going to be looking at this here for the first time with you on this new run. I want to go back to, let's start with the surface map and take a look at what's happening. Because when you're going to have that blocking high developing between Iceland and Greenland, you got a big storm there off the coast of Greenland. Brings in some snow into the British Isles along about looks like Thursday and Thursday night, and then going forward now we're through the weekend. Doesn't look like too much is happening across Europe at this point, but you can see the big surface high that's building up over Scotland. So that's part of that upper high, a reflection of part of that upper high, and then gradually that upper high shifts westward. So, you know, now we have, these are easterly winds here. This is cold air that I guess is going to be coming down from the northeast with the way this blocking high is setting up. And, oh, look at that. Looks like a low spinning up in the North Sea there. I got to really learn more about how all this plays. Why don't we put the temperature anomalies up for Europe here? And indeed, at least at day 10, it's pretty far below normal over a large area. We'll start out with today. Oh boy, don't you love it? Everybody seems to be getting on to look at this at the same time, so it's slowing loading times up over at tropicaltidbits.com. Not that we're complaining, Levi Cowan. You know, you get a lot of traffic. You're getting lots of traffic. All right, you know what? This isn't working very well, so I'm going to come off the maps at this point and come back to you guys. So if you got any questions with regards to this pattern that what we're seeing, and let me illustrate it here. By the way, this is this was earlier today, the GFS. And you could see here you have that strong blocking developing all across the polar regions. You got this ridge that's building into the Canadian Northwest from the southwest. Okay, rather than being pushed up north-south into Alaska, you got this wrapped up cutoff low sitting near Hawaii, and this complex that's in the southwest with energy that's rotating around it. And then you've got this big, sort of this amorphous Atlantic storm that sits off the coast of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland and extends all the way out to the Azores. So we're going to have, like I said, I think we're going to have interesting times ahead from the standpoint of forecasting. And everything that I'm looking at, ensembles, and by the way, I don't think that they were in today. And again, it doesn't look like it was updated. The teleconnections to tell us, you know, the state of the PNA and the NAO is off the ensembles from last night was not available today. I have yesterday's map, but judging from what I'm seeing, I'm sure that we're seeing the NAO drop pretty deep into negative territory, and I would be interested to see, you know, how the EPO and the PNA worked out with this run. PNA may not be as bad as negative toward the end of the period, but we'll have to wait till tomorrow to see what that comes up with. But if you think winter is over, I wouldn't put it that way. I think I would phrase it more that, you know, the next phase of winter, let's call it the end phase of winter in the next 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and that can be an extremely volatile time. Normally, it's a volatile time when we get in toward the end of February through the month of March and early April, and I think that volatility is going to be there, you know, certainly the next couple of weeks, and then we've got to deal with this block and how that is going to play into all of this. So it's a different. You can't. Let me put it this way: the kind of weather that you get in December and January and the early part of February is in the wintertime is vastly different in character from the weather that you get through the latter part of February and through the month of March. They're both part of the winter season, but we're in that period now where and it's coming a little early perhaps, but we're in that period where we're going to be seeing increasing volatility. Okay, so let me just run through a lot of comments today. All right, Tom. So you know what? Don't worry. Let's move on from the climate change. I wasn't trying to be mean or anything, but let's go from there. I try to, you know what, Brandon? I try to be sensible on the climate stuff. I can't really get into it here. It's too much, and everybody's got their politics wrapped up in it. So I really don't want to get into that mess. Joshua Penn, highest barrel pressure in Dulles in 3 years. That is a pretty strong high that came down and out. Is last March a fair analog to this March? It was briefly quite cold with winter storm. We did go into a negative NAO for a brief period last March, as I remember it, right around the time that we got that storm. And then I also think, if I remember correctly, we did have a negative NAO, North Atlantic Oscillation, toward the latter part of the month into early April, because we did have a couple of late season systems that impacted some areas, especially away from the coast. I don't know. I think this blocking signature here is going to be bigger than last year's. This one looks like it's going to set up and sit for at least a few weeks. So this might This might have a bit of a different outcome. Is the Strato split on schedule? Yes, it is, Scott Olson. I believe let me go back and let me pull up the GFS. We can look at the GFS from the top. And give me 1 second here. I got to do a little bit of adjusting. First off, we're going to take a hemispheric view. And what I'm going to pull up here is the 10 millibar. Okay, so we're all the way up. Okay, we're basically up at the stratosphere, and I'm gonna have to make this a little smaller so you can see the whole thing. So I'm gonna go back. The first frame of this is actually 3 days ago, and if you look, there's a high over northwestern Europe. You have a high that's sitting over Siberia, okay, and you've got four vortices here, one over Hudson Bay and the other one in Siberia. The split has already occurred here, so it actually started about 4 days ago, and notice that the two vortexes now become completely separate as that upper high builds in the middle. Now, the upper vortex in Canada moves into Western Canada. So, as we move through time, the other one kind of crosses around through Europe, and you've got this big upper high in between. I have to tell you, honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how all of this relates to what's going on at the surface. But, here we've got, I'm just trying to follow this through continuity. And you've got this new upper high that forms up this way. This vortex is down here. But you saw where the split is. And then it's got this other, then it goes bizarre after that. Upper high, upper low, with that polar vortex just weakening and weakening over the 16-day period in the upper atmosphere. So, this is a pretty large development. I got to bring on somebody who really knows this stuff and can speak to it better than I can. I'm a short range, bottom of the atmosphere type of guy in a lot of ways. This is the last couple of years really been the first time that a lot of my colleagues even looked up there. But there are people that just kind of, that's what they do. They look way up at the top of the atmosphere through all of this. It is a lot to digest. And I'm going to try and see if I can get a guest on here that can talk about this at some point. Sebastian P., the ocean water temperatures reach their bottom in terms of the temperatures at the end of this month. Usually ocean water temperatures bottom at the very end of February, very beginning of March, and then start their climb. Just like the in the summertime, the summer air temperatures peak usually very mid-July to the very beginning of August, but the ocean water temperatures don't peak until late August, early September. So there's about a 4 to 6 week lag with all of that. Yes, Howard Vanderhoff, would that I could get Judah Cohen on here. As soon as I can figure out how to if I can figure out how to put Skype on my program that I use to broadcast live, then I'll see what I can do. He's a very busy guy, but I'm gonna work on this. Okay. I would love to have him on. Dr. Cohen, if you're watching or if you hear about this, I would love to have you on here to talk to you about all this. Let's see. I'm a bottom feeder too. Okay. Severe weather due next week due to warm temps. There it might be across the south with the storm development that's going to occur near in the middle, and the appearance of 80s along the Gulf Coast at some point. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be severe weather at some point. Raymond's coming back on, so we must be getting close to severe weather season. Good to see you here, David. Yeah, David Schwartz, if you could find out, I've been talking to a few people about how to stream Skype on here. I would love to figure, you know what it is, I really don't have time to figure those things out until the weekend when I have time to be able to sit down and go through it. So I'm going to do that this weekend. I'm going to set aside a few hours to try to figure out how to do, how to stream. I do use OBS. Brandon, I do use the OBS studios. I love it, and I've been learning little by little how to use it and add to it. It's just that, when the weather is very busy, like it's been for most of this winter, it leaves me very little time to go in there and figure out all the details and all the things that it can do. But I will get to it. That's on my to-do list in terms of improving what I'm doing here on my YouTube channel. Over the next number of months and going into the summer. All right, I just think I got everybody's comments here today. You guys, I always love it when you guys throw up your questions and I try to answer them as best I can. Sometimes it requires me to do a little research on it, but I do really love it when you guys get all engaged. Scott Olson, yes, Levi did set up a Patreon link. Yes, if I actually I at least I try twice a year to hit him with on his PayPal. And you guys, he's got a great site. If you no obligation to hit Levi's PayPal, but he's always looking for some ways to put up bigger and better servers to handle the traffic and get more and more stuff on. So you're helping him, and a lot of his stuff is free, and it's high quality stuff that hopefully he'll never go to a subscription site. I'll keep my fingers crossed on that. But if you can go to his go to Tropical Tidbits, and you can hit his the Patreon. Yes, Christopher, wouldn't be surprised to see 70s next week, but that I think you got to be careful this early because a lot of that's going to depend on wind direction and clouds. Ryan Ford, do you think the low pressure developing along a stalled front on Saturday could resemble what happened early in the month of this past December when we had a 3 to 5 inch snowfall? That could be. I want to see what the surface temperature profile is like, but it could be. If you can keep that wind from getting too easterly, and you get more of keep the wind more northeast or north-northeast, that'll pinch in the cold air and keep it in here. Yeah, I got to go back and look at that system from early December. I do remember it. Off the top of my head, it's kind of similar. So I wouldn't be surprised if we wind up with a similar outcome. Why not? Weird things happen every winter. Why not another weird event with these shots of cold air in a horrible pattern and teleconnections that are mostly in the wrong place? And if you wind up with what the European and the Canadian are forecasting, you're going to ask yourself, how did this happen? You can't wait for next winter, the 2000-2001 analog. You're already going into next winter, Tom Adams. Come on, breathe, okay? Looks more, it does look like a more mature way. I got to go back and look. Well, Shelly Man Studios with the teleconnections the way they are and how weather systems are behaving across the country. Yeah, as I said, the only way you're going to get anything in this pattern is the fact that you got to have that cold air and that next weather system and wave time out just perfectly. And you see Matthew Goodman, you got pointing out the weather channels forecasting below average for the whole month of February. See, this was the danger back in January when we were talking about the pattern changing, and that whether it was going to go into a repeat of the first half, and it's never exactly the same, even though it might rhyme. And in this case, instead of the trough setting up at 80, the trough set up at 90. Okay, everything was about 10 degrees further to the west. So this is why you got to be really careful when you look at things and try to figure out when you go. It's volatile enough to do it with the maps that you have in front of you with 16 days. When you start dealing with the wide variability that's with the climate models that oftentimes in the long range can flip on a dime, it becomes really frustrating. That's why that's why I really try not to go too much beyond that 1 to 2 week period, because there's just way too much variability. Any one thing can happen that can change everything downstream. Look at everybody was talking about the Madden-Julian oscillation going into phase 8 for this month. And what happened? Well, apparently it's in phase 7, and it's kind of been stuck in phase 7. It hasn't made its way into phase 8. Then I'm seeing yesterday people saying, well, now it looks like some of the models are forecasting it to go into a weak phase 8. So this is what happens here. And then you wind up, if you put too much into it, you're going to wind up with egg on your face. Okay? Tom, you're on this Al Gore kick. Why? I don't get it. Okay, I'm not understanding why you're going on with this about him and the carbon footprint and all the we might get a normal winter in the east. By the way, at least in New York City through February 13th, the temperatures from December, January, and the first 13 days of February are about normal. for over that 2.5-month period, okay? And the snowfall is actually a little bit above normal. So I don't know what you mean by a normal winter, because all winters in the Northeast, particularly the coastal Northeast, have volatility built into them, okay? You're always going to get wild temperature swings. I don't know where this notion that you're going to have, 3 months of temperatures that are consistently a certain number or within a very small range. It doesn't work that way, okay? It's never worked that way. So if you're asking me, if you think that the evidence that this winter is, evidence of, a bigger issue based on the singular events of what we've had, no, you can't do that, okay? It doesn't work that way, all right? Howard Vanderhoff, are the models too bullish with the Greenland block? Well, that's a good question, Howard. I think the only way we're going to know is to watch the model trends over the next 5 to 7 days to see how it handles that upper high. We saw back in November how every run seemed to have it at a different strength, and some runs, made it very weak. Other runs made it very strong. That's a good question, because that's going to really determine what. Not only the blocking high, by the way, is important, but the strength of the Atlantic storms that develop along and just south of 50 degrees north. That is going to be that's going to be also very important, because that's going to have impact on everything downstream and upstream. So, I wish I could give you the answer to that question. That is probably the $1,000 question here with regards to it. Okay, let me just see. Why don't we use median snowfall for areas like the coastal Northeast that have right skewed distributions? Joshua, if you could give me a link that shows that, I don't have the time to sit down and run numbers, but the coastal areas of the Northeast in the last 17 years have had much higher snowfalls on average than the inland areas, and this is another winter where that has happened. That has been a pattern that started back in 2000 and continues through this winter. You go to the prior 30 winters and the pattern was actually in reverse. Ryan, the Asian weather boy, look on Facebook. You sent me a video on how to add Skype on OBS. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. Let's see. They were mean to our snow, weren't they? Raymond, my yard became a mess. They're always mean to the snow, and snow has the nerve of melting. Let me just go on here. I'm just trying to find Ryan. I lost your message, but it's a good thing I did see it. Thank you so much for putting that up. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go check that out in just a little bit. And yes, by the way, there is a tendency for people to sort of wane and wax nostalgically about the past. When I was young, I ask this question, by the way, at a lot of my talks, and I'm always fascinated by the answers. Okay, I ask people that remember the winters from 1970 and afterward, if they were around my age, and I asked them if it's their perception that it snowed more when they were a kid as opposed to now. And this is specifically directed to people on Long Island. Almost every time I ask that question, they always say that the snow was more when they were young as opposed to now. And in reality, it's double now what it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Okay, the last 18 years, just for Long Island, and especially for central and eastern Long Island, the snowfall average from 1970 to 2000 was a little over 20 inches a winter. The long-term average is at 32. The average since the year 2000 has been closer to 40, depending on where you are, between 42 and 45 inches. Okay, so it's been the reverse. We all tend to remember our youths as if our youthful times as being far better than it is now, and that the numbers will not bear that out. At least that's the case where I am. I don't know, maybe where you are, Tom, it might be different. I don't know what it, I don't know specifically what it is for places like Washington, Philadelphia, Boston, and so on, but I would kind of lay odds that what I just said may apply to all those places as well. All right, folks, got to hit the top of the hour here, so got to go. Good to be with everybody. As always, we will be back, tomorrow, back around the same time, 6 o'clock Eastern time, with all the latest. And in the meantime, at 9:15 tonight, you can tune in on my Facebook page, meteorologist Joe Cioffi, and you can catch me and Joe Rayo on the Joe and Joe Show, which is almost a nightly event, but we try to go every night, but some weeks we might take Fridays off because we get tired, but or if there isn't too much weather going on. But tune in tonight, and we'll talk some more about this. In the meantime, I got website posts galore today on meteorologistjoecioffi.com, so you can check that out. And that's pretty much it. And anybody that's new to my YouTube channel, welcome aboard. Thank you for being here. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel, and this way you can set up notifications because I do at least one live stream every day. Take care.